Taking some time today to come back to what happens in some of these nations around the world and some of the nations we're not even quite so familiar with, nations in Central Asia, known as the stands. There's Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan and a whole lot of different stands. Let's talk about Christian radio and reaching out into very diverse cultures. Rudy Weins, a veteran minister overseeing FEBC Eurasia. Not only does he cover the major territories of Russia and Ukraine with Christian broadcasting, but also in Moldova and other nations of that region and Central Asia. Rudy Weins is back with us. Rudy, a special welcome back to 2020.
Well, thank you.
Rudy, when we talk Central Asia and all of these stands, we're not so familiar with them geographically in Australia. They don't make the headlines every week, but they've got their own challenges, and FEBC, an international Christian broadcaster, is interested in these people groups broadcasting into their homelands.
Yes, like as of 91, there were suddenly, in Central Asia, there are 5 new countries, all those stands. Stan means settlement, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, those stands, those are independent countries now for the last 30 years. And they used to be under Soviet Union, and so very secularized, so they were literate, 100%, so everybody had to go to school. Even so, traditionally, culturally, they are Muslims. So now they were very secularized. They were atheists, kind of, And so now, 30 years ago, when they became independent, they think they had to find their identity again in Islam. And so, of course, Islam is coming back more and more, traditionally and culturally. That's how they talk about themselves. But we know that Jesus, or as in their language, Isa, Masih, is the Savior and the Lord, So, of course, we want to share that good news with them. And so in the church there, in most of these stands, there is a Kyrgyz church, a Kazakh church, a Uzbek church, a Tajik church, but it's a first generation, really. Like I often tell, I experienced myself, like in the Western world, you often hear elderly people praying for their children and grandchildren. Over there, you hear young people praying, Christians, praying for their parents and grandparents. It's the other way around, because it's much, much more difficult for the elderly people to accept the truth in Jesus than for the younger people.
Last time we were talking, we were discussing the difficulty that there must be when you're a Christian broadcaster on those two sides of the border, the Russian side and on the Ukrainian side. And with war going on, you take a peacemaker position and you try and bring peace between enemies. It's even more complicated when you start to talk about what's going on with all of the stands in Central Asia, because these are, as you say, they're Islamic nations, and you're a Christian broadcaster. Are there special things that you've got to do to be able to broadcast into those Islamic countries?
Well, you're right. So I had lots of experience in communicating with Orthodox people, who have some knowledge of Christianity and the Bible and so on. Here it was the other way around. But still, what I find and what we find, what our local people, local believers, like the Kazakh and Kyrgyz friends, my friends who are followers of Christ, what the approach we take is that no Muslim can afford to say anything bad about Jesus. Jesus is the best prophet, and even in their religion. So we try to stick to our original FEBC kind of slogan, motto, Christ to the world by media, so it's not Christianity, is actually Isa Masih, it's Jesus Christ, so we try to share Jesus instead of Christianity, in that sense. So, and that very often helps. So that, talking about peacemaking, so we don't come as enemies, but as peacemakers. And also like the one of our key person in Kyrgyz, our ministry in our radio. Okay, so he basically asked before he became a follower of Christ, he asked his teacher, Muslim teacher, said, "How about Jesus, Isa? Who is he?" And is he our guy, our fellow? Is he a stranger to us? No, he's our prophet. But the Russians took him and made them to their god. So that was the explanation he got. So, well, since he's a good Lord, prophet of light and truth, in that sense. So we have to know, we can learn more about him. Yes, actually we should. We should actually read the Gospels, but the Christians have corrupted them, but we should actually read them. So that opened his mind, and he started to learn more about Jesus, and finally he became a follower of Christ. Now he's one of our key people there in Kyrgyzstan.
Maybe some of the secret's getting out here, but in Australia we probably tend to have the perception that there is an anti-Christian streak in Islam, and perhaps that's at the leader level. That's at the level where there are extremists who would use the Islamic scriptures against the Christian. But when you're broadcasting into all of the stands, all of those nations, what you're saying is that there's an openness to the Jesus of the Bible because he is also recognized as a prophet in Islam. And in that, people are coming to faith in Christ.
And that's true. And of course, as Christians, as followers of Christ, so we want to love God and our neighbors as well. So we are actually known in our broadcasts, our daily broadcasts, especially where we have a 24/7 broadcast, like on an FM network, on FM stations. So we are known as family radio, so the family relationships like marriage, upbringing kids, we have a special, in Kyrgyz language, a special talk show we call School for Mothers. For some reason, they found our people there found it very, very helpful and needed, in that sense. Of course, that's oriented towards mothers, but then we need programs, and one of our fellows does a good program for men, and men. He said, the best results, the best call I get from men is when they say, thank you, for the broadcast. It got to me that the domestic abuse is actually bad.
We will often think, and it's been a long time that I've been saying, oftentimes the gospel rides on the back of the family. And so when we have a biblical foundation for family, we know we have a recipe that works. For husbands and wives and raising children and the way we conduct ourselves, the way we live our lives, the way we're resistant to those things that are often addictive. There's something powerful I can hear you say here, that when you've got a Christian broadcast into these lands, the family is a wonderful way to bring the gospel and see it in its fruition.
And that also helps us with the government. So the government in those 5 stands, for example, 5 new countries in Central Asia, former Soviet republics. So the government tries to be secular. So it's not like, an Islamic state, in that sense. So they don't want that. They are more afraid of the extremist religious people than of us, Christians, in that sense. So for that reason, so we don't have much opposition from the governments in those traditionally Muslim countries. So the opposition comes often in the death threats that our people get. They are more from those minorities, small extremist groups, So they of course become militant, and so and there have been cases where they have been beaten up, and so this kind of animosity. But that's not official and not major, not from everyone. Those are smaller groups, Of course, there are always people like that, in that sense. But it's a great opportunity that we have there in those countries.
And when you have a message which is about a harmonious relationship between a husband and a wife, and a harmonious family, no doubt, like so many nations, and this might not be only the 5 stands that we're talking about, but the prevalence of domestic violence and the things that fuel that. The Christian message in all of that has real resolution to some of those problems, and people are obviously discovering that very powerfully.
Yeah, that's true. Like the young people, the women, the wives, the mothers, they love us, So we are basically their fans, but not only the women and children or young people, but also men, because there are lots of men that are educated, are decent people, but they grew up in that society where it was okay. So, for example, one of the, I don't want even to mention his name, but top leader, religious leader, so was asked, is that okay to beat up your wife? And the answer was, you shouldn't overdo it. So don't break any bones and so on. So be careful when you do that. So that's a kind of society people grow up, and then we come with respecting each other, with loving each other, with taking care of each other. Who wouldn't love that? Who wouldn't want that?
Yes, and even though there's some misinterpretation, of course, Ephesians chapter 5, husbands and wives submitting to one another, and so different cultures, and so those Islamic cultures in particular, as you say, what becomes good news in understanding who Jesus is good news for your family. And this is what follows, isn't it? The Christian message of the gospel. In the wake follows the blessing for families and for communities, for whole villages, for cities and nations.
Well, I personally, I've been a follower of Christ for many years, and I am convinced that Jesus is the answer to all problems we have. So when we get to know Jesus, and his teaching, even death is no problem, I always say.
Now, I imagine that in the 5 stands, given they're an Islamic context, there's a difference here in some of the social problems because largely alcohol would be banned in a lot of those Islamic countries. But you're also overseeing Russia and Ukraine, where I'm aware that alcoholism and the family dysfunction is very much fueled by that. A different set of problems when you've got what happens in Russia or in Ukraine to those things that are going on in Central Asia.
Well, of course, vodka, the alcohol is a huge problem in the Slavic society, in the Russian. But not only there. Now among these Muslim countries, these stands, the drinking problem, the alcohol problem is so huge. So I asked some of the people there, were just, talking. I said, well, on weddings, I assume you are Muslim, so you don't have any alcohol. And he said, well, no, we drink from tea kettles, so like, so not out of the bottles, but out of tea kettles. So alcohol is still a problem, like they were secularized. So Russians taught them lots of good things, but some bad things as well, so they got used to it. And alcoholism, is a problem, even in those stands. Especially domestic abuse often is related to alcohol as well.
Rudy, you're leading FEBC Eurasia. Here in Australia, we like a bit of Christian music on our Christian radio. We like lots of talk as well, as we are today, but you're primarily talk on Christian radio, FEBC, into the context that you're leading.
That's right. Of course, like if you have FM radio, it cannot be without music, so music is a part of it. But in our talk shows, of course, in our broadcast, we use music more as an interview with a singer, with an artist and so on. And because there are lots of Christian music, good content music, like just humanly good music and so on. We talk about that. We talk about the people of arts, and so on in many ways. We use that also in sharing the good news, because I personally always say God is a God of beauty. So He is a creator and He creates beautiful stuff, so beautiful things. So we don't shy away from music or arts in that sense, So, but of course, there's lots of abuse or misuse of God's creation, and I think that's the basic for evil, when people misuse the good. Everything good comes from God, whatever's good, and they misuse it, then it becomes evil.
Well, there are beautiful things on radio, and not everyone thinks that the music is beautiful. Some people think the talk is beautiful. So wonderful to have a conversation with you today, Rudy. For listeners here in Australia who can support FEBC, Far East Broadcasting Company, one of the big Christian broadcasters around the world, and as we're talking about those 5 stands and the good work you do also in Russia and in Ukraine, what's a good way for people to connect with you, Rudy, and with the team here in Australia?
Well, it's best probably through FEBC Australia, because they have been partnering even in most of those countries, like Russia, Ukraine, even Moldova. Recently, I talked with the national director here in Australia. So even there, they have helped us, and so on. Even Russian-speaking people have participated in broadcasting with us, so we put them on the schedule, So that's FEBC Australia is a big partner in our worldwide outreach, of FEBC.
Well, here's how you can connect with FEBC in Australia and support the good work that's going on in places like Russia and Ukraine, along with Moldova and other nations in that region, and these 5 stands of Central Asia. Rudy Weins is the veteran minister who oversees FEBC Eurasia. But to connect and to support the good work that's going on in Eurasia, go to febc.org.au. That's the Australian website, febc.org.au. Rudy, thank you so much for sharing your heart with us today on 2020.
Thank you for having me.